It's that time of the year. We are getting close to a new patch, so players start reading or hearing around them mentions of crests, fragments, changes to the Great Vault, to the Catalyst, to the item level, a loot of Mythic Plus, of the raid, changes to the crafting, and they're like, what the shit is going on? I didn't know any of this. And this is where I come in, because today we have the recap of everything that is changing in 10.2 when it comes to basically loot. Gear, whether it is from the Great Vault, the Catalyst, Mythic Plus, the raid, crafting, everything that is getting changed in 10.2, which is quite a bit. So, before we start, we have to put a barrier of entry. This is going to be the child-proof requirement for everyone to pass, to understand before we go forward, which is the fact that fragments, crest fragments are being removed in 10.2. We are getting the same values of fragments turned into crests. So, in live, you have 15 aspect fragments, and you turn them into an aspect crest. In 10.2, first of all of your crests now are in the currency tab, and no longer in your bags, and number 2, now you get 15 of them. It doesn't actually change anything. If you're doing Mythic Plus and you're getting 12 crest fragments in live, in 10.2, you're going to be doing Mythic Plus and getting 12 crests. It's gonna be the same thing, just with the removal of the fragments. So the one thing to understand before going forward is that fragments are removed, 10.2 crests drop in the same quantity of fragments do right now in live, and that everything else remains the same. For example, instead of requiring 15 fragments to turn into a crest to upgrade one piece of gear, in 10.2 you will simply require directly 15 crests. We are basically removing the middleman of the fragments, but nothing else is changing. What is actually changing though is the nerf to the amount of crests you can now get per week. In live you can get 150 fragments per week as a cap. So 150 fragments turn into 10 crests, which turn into 10 upgrades per week. This is something that has not been relevant in months. This was very important in the first 3 weeks or so, 4 weeks or so maybe of the patch, because you wanted to squeeze every possible gear upgrade you could, but then after those first few weeks nobody cared. However, it will be relevant and very important at the release of the patch. The change in 10.2 is that now it's only 90 crests as a weekly cap, instead of 150 fragments of before. So instead of having 10 upgrades per week in each and every type of crest, in 10.2 you only have 6 upgrades per week. So it's a significantly reduced amount of upgrades you can get every week on your gear, which was a point of contention for some players who thought in 10.1 we simply got to max level way too quickly. We simply were able to beef up in item level, get to 455 in just 3 weeks, being a bit too fast. So it will definitely be slower how we gear up, how fast we gear up. It's nerfed, but there are some quality of life improvements. First of all, in live right now, fragments drop from a certain type of content. For example, aspect fragments dropping from plus 16 and higher Mythic Plus keys and Mythic Raid, and once you reach the weekly cap, they stop dropping. So if you capped at the release of the season 150 aspect fragments, then you simply have to wait for the reset to get any more. In 10.2 there is a backwards compatibility, in the sense that if you are doing Mythic Plus 20s to get aspect crests and then cap your weekly aspect crests limit, you will start instead looting worm crests. From the same Mythic Plus key, without having to change difficulty or lowering your Mythic Plus key, you will be getting worm crests. If you cap worm crests as well, you go down to drakes, and then you go down to whelplings. The same goes for any other type of content. You already capped your aspect crests for the week, and now you go into Mythic Raid. If you kill bosses, you will be looting worm crests. So this makes it so that whichever type of content you do, you will always be dropping crests. Even if you have capped the quest that comes from that particular content, Blizzard will simply go and look at the second highest available quest that you can loot and give you that one instead. That is quite a good quality of life addition, for example, to avoid the annoyance that many players had to go through at the release of this season, where they were done already doing lower Mythic Plus keys. They only wanted to do plus 16s for the higher item level from the gear of Mythic Plus, but they still had not capped Worm Crests. So they had to go down to do plus 12 or plus 11, 6 or 7 keys that they didn't want to do simply because they had to cap the crests. This will no longer be an issue in 10.2. You can simply continue to do the content you were always doing and now get lower level crests instead, if you capped the crest that comes from that content you were doing. There is also another quality of life change. Right now in live, you are already aware, I'm assuming, you can convert a higher level crest into a lower level one at a 1-to-1 ratio. So you can take all of your aspect crests right now and turn them into worms if you wanted to. In 10.2, there is also the change the other way around. You can convert a lower level crest into a higher level crest. We were very excited about this change as a possible way to revitalize and revamp the open world, events, world quest activities in the open world, because now even tryhards, even Mythic Plus players or raiders might have wanted to go in the open world, for example, to collect Whelpling crests or Drake crests, because now those can be upgraded all the way up to an aspect crest. However, this has been made less relevant, as we just pointed out, by the fact that even if you cap your main crest, your aspect crest from high-level Mythic Plus keys, you will still be dropping the lower ones anyways. And then also the fact that the conversion rate of this upgrade is 6-to-1. It's not exchanging one worm for one aspect crest. It's changing 6 worm crests for one aspect crest. In 10.2 numbers, 90 lower crests for 15 higher crests. Unless you are a goldfish, your memory should come back up to what we talked about 5 minutes ago. The weekly cap of crests is now 90. So this means that if you want to have one crest of a higher level, you have to spend all of your weekly allowance of the lower level crest. So if you cap aspect crests and worm crests, you can take all of the worm crests you have capped and turn them into 15 extra crests of a higher level of aspect crests. That's the change in 10.2 to slightly increase the cap. If we talked about before, in 10.1 you had 10 possible upgrades per week versus the 6 you have in 10.2, the 6 can become 7. If you spend all of the crests of the previous tier to upgrade them, the 6 weekly upgrades become 7. That's the change. Now, to be able to do this upgrading of crests, you need to reach certain item level breakpoints. Not overall item level in every piece of gear, okay? Going from Whelpling to Drake crests requires all of your gear to be at least 450 item level in Season 3, which is the equivalent of 411 now. Going from Drake to Worm is 463 item level, 424 right now. And lastly, going from Worm to Aspect Crest requires you to be 476 item level in all of your gear, which is the equivalent of 437 right now. So only once you have reached those breakpoints you can start upgrading the relevant crest. This will be, again, quite important in the first couple of weeks to be able to reach that particular breakpoint, to start upgrading your gear with those crests and to exchange the crest to the higher ones. But then after a few weeks, of course, it won't become nearly as important. There has also been a significant change to the crafted gear. This was even worse a few weeks ago. Crafted gear was even weaker. Just yesterday, Blizzard buffed the crafted gear in 10.2. In live, crafted items are 447 item level. The myth track in 10.1 is the one you get from the vault, from the Mythic Plus vault, and the base loot from Mythic raid bosses, which also caps out at 447. That's because the myth track has 3 levels: 441, 444, 447. And it's the equivalent of crafted gear, which is why right now it's possible and likely that many players have almost all of their gear crafted to 447 because it's just very strong. Unless you have a way to get 450s, juicy 450s from the latest bosses of Mythic raiding, you might as well craft every piece of gear because they are the strongest right now. In 10.2, this has been nerfed. In 10.2, crafted items are 486 item level, which is still the equivalent of 447, but the myth track you get from the Mythic Great Vault loot and the base item level of Mythic raid bosses is 489, which is 450 right now. That's because the myth track now has 4 levels. 480, 483, 486, which is the same as 441, 444, 447, but then has one extra jump to 489. This means that later on, once you start trying to min-max and get your top level gear, crafted gear is no longer the default strongest. This will put also some annoyance in whether or not you want to start using more crafted items like rings with the guaranteed socket and the guaranteed good stats. What about the flavor pocket for your permanent food buff? Now you have to use it on an item that won't be at max item level anymore. That's the main change to make crafted gear weaker in 10.2, and we have been lucky because this crafted gear was supposed to be even weaker just a few days ago. There is a very slight, very minor quality of life change in the sense that right now in live to craft one enchanted crest for the crafting you need 4 crests. So you need 60 fragments. In 10.2 the 60 fragments are the same for the highest item level crest, the aspect crest. Those are still 60 crests required, which is the equivalent of 4 crests right now. The lower level crests that you can use for crafting have had their price discounted, which, if you think about it, makes sense. Aspect crest has the highest item level and it costs way more. Why would you have to spend the same amount of crests for items that can be crafted at a much lower level? So the crafting with the enchanted crest for Whelpling, Drake and Worm will be discounted compared to the one for the aspect crest crafting, which is ultimately still what most players will want to craft, the aspect craft item rather than the lower ones, but it's still good to know that the lower level ones now are cheaper to get. We also have a change to the catalyst that we have pointed out before already, and it's been confirmed once more. 10.1 as well as 10.0 as well as Shadowlands, the catalyst came out after 6 weeks. 1 charge per week, but only at the beginning of week 6. In 10.2, it's a massive change because now the catalyst is active from week 1. Immediately as the season starts, you immediately have the option to get 1 tier piece, but you will get 1 charge every 2 weeks instead of 1 charge per week. This is the simple graph to show you for how long the 10.2 change will be better than the normal, the standard version of the catalyst, which is roughly the first 3 months, which is also very good, because the catalyst is obviously very important in the first few weeks, in the first couple of months even, but after that it starts losing its value. This is a particularly good change for non-raiders. If you consider that you still have the meta achievement, the one to reach a certain PvP rating or Mythic Plus rating or ahead of the curve to gain 1 tier token guaranteed of your choice, you only need 3 catalyst charges, right? The older version, the version we have in live, would have given you 3 catalyst charges on week 8. The new version is going to give you 3 catalyst charges on week 5. In week 5 of Aberrus or Vault of the Incarnates, the catalyst wasn't even open to begin with. That's how much faster non-raiders especially will be able to get their 4-piece set bonus in 10.2. Basically 5 weeks. That is a very good change for the next season. The last bit of change is raid related. Rare items are now extra loot on top of regular loot. So if a boss is giving you 4 items and then procs the extra loot rare piece of gear, it will give you 4 items plus 1. So the rare item is not eating up 1 gear slot from the boss, it's gonna be an extra. Also, there is only going to be one tier piece per boss now instead of a random chance of 1 to 3. So this will actually be cutting away quite a decent amount of possibility of tier pieces from the raid compared to live, by quite a bit. But with the catalyst open from week 1, it's much less of a problem. Lastly, easier ways for your raid roster to swap around and guarantee multiple vault options, because in live the amount of raid bosses needed for the vault options in the raid are 3, 5, 7. In 10.2 they will be 2, 4, 7, meaning a much easier time being able to get multiple great vault options, especially important at the start of the raid, during progress, for example. That's a good change as well for raiding. So with these rare items done, these are all of the changes related to gear, whether it is from crafting, Mythic Plus, raiding, Great Vault, Catalyst, what have you, that will happen in 10.2. It's gonna be quite a bit to get used to lose your fragments, to only start thinking about quests, to start dividing quests by 15, to make a comparison in your head with what you had in Season 1 and Season 2, and overall the gearing will be slightly slower, if perhaps slightly more optimized. So these are, so far, the changes coming in 10.2 related to basically character power. So hoping that the informational video helped some players, especially the ones that didn't get stuck at rule number 1, the one we pointed out at the start. We are now leaving each other on this Wednesday. We're starting the goodbyes as usual by thanking all of the Patreon supporters for the contribution and the help to the growth of the channel, as well as everyone else who is poor or greedy or both and can do it still completely for free. You can like and comment down below, as well as subscribe to the channel itself. So with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, finally, this is the first day on October the 18th where we can actually call this day cold.